We are taking a closer look at the Oversight Board's decision to uphold Facebook's suspension of former President Trump's accounts. The former Danish Prime Minister and co-chair of the Facebook Oversight Board spoke to CBS This Morning co-host Tony DeCopel about why this was the right decision and why the board kicked it back to Facebook to decide whether to permanently ban Mr. Trump. Here's a bit of that conversation.
We also said to Facebook that they couldn't just invent an arbitrary penalty. And that is what they did when they said that it was an indefinite ban. Indefinite bans doesn't exist in Facebook's own community standards. So we told Facebook to not come to us with something that doesn't exist in their own rules and go back and within the next 6 months find out what penalty should they actually give Mr. Trump. And it should be a penalty which is in their own rules.
Bill Baer is a visiting fellow in governance studies at the Brookings Institution. He also served as Assistant Attorney General in charge of the Antitrust Division at the Justice Department and as Director of the Bureau of Competition at the Federal Trade Commission. That is quite a resume, sir, and I'm glad you are with us right now. What are your thoughts on the decision by Facebook's Oversight Board?
Well, first of all, from an antitrust perspective, I don't think there's a serious issue here. Facebook had some rules about what was appropriate behavior or not. The then President of the United States systematically violated those rules, told the big lie, spread disinformation, encouraged incitement, was a partial cause of what happened in our Capitol on January 6th. Facebook has a right to demand that people abide by the rules, just like a cable network doesn't have to carry every advertiser, doesn't have to allow an advertiser to promote poisonous products, unhealthy products. So this is a legitimate exercise of a private company's right to have standards of behavior, standards of conduct.
So we saw some swift reaction from Republicans. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy vowed to, quote, rein in big tech power over our speech, while Mr. Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, said it's, quote, time that we break up big tech, not just regulate them. But is it as simple as that? I just think that, oftentimes politicians don't really understand what they're talking about when they're talking about these companies. Just breaking up Facebook doesn't mean the things that Facebook is doing go away.
That's right. There is an argument that more competition for Facebook would be a good thing, that we as consumers, if we don't like what Facebook is doing, would have more options to go to and be able to take our data, the information Facebook obtains from us and then sells to advertisers who want to advertise on its platform. If we had portability, the ability to move our data from Facebook to somewhere else, that would be great. But, and this is the lawsuit that the Federal Trade Commission and many state attorneys general are bringing, is challenging whether or not Facebook has basically dug a big moat around the Facebook castle and made it impossible for anybody to compete and made it impossible for us to have alternatives to go to if we're unhappy with what Facebook is doing.
In a recent podcast, you said that we're at a decision point when it comes to antitrust. What did you mean by that?
What I meant was that for the last 40 years, our antitrust laws, as interpreted by the courts, have been construed very narrowly. There's not much that the courts will sustain in terms of a government challenge to an acquisition by a dominant company. There's not much behavior by a monopolist, somebody with a huge market share, dominant in its space, that the courts find to be a violation of antitrust laws. We've got these two cases pending involving Google search, and Facebook that will be a test of whether or not the courts are willing to be more assertive in demanding that companies behave according to our antitrust laws as they were enacted many years ago. If they don't, I think we're going to see, and we're already seeing on the Hill, bipartisan congressional support. And bipartisan congressional support, in most cases, is an oxymoron. here there does seem to be both Republican and Democratic support that we need to be more aggressive in policing the behavior of dominant firms, not just in the tech space, pharmaceuticals, hospital mergers, airlines, agriculture, but particularly with regard to high tech. The big tech companies seem to have persistent dominance and are in a position, as I said earlier, to dig a moat around the castle they built and prevent anybody from competing.
But is the question, though, around regulation, or should we be thinking at the very least about accountability? Mark Zuckerberg being held accountable. In other words, what's unique about Facebook or a tech company is that they can arbitrarily change the rules of their service agreement. They can change their algorithms, and oftentimes none of us know anything about that. And so the ability to do that is essentially because Mr. Zuckerberg is the sole decider as to what happens within his company, and whatever he decides affects all of us. So maybe it's a combination of regulation, but also accountability because the company is so big, so powerful.
That's a good point. One could give the Federal Trade Commission or another agency the authority to prescribe some rules about accountability, disclosure about how your algorithms work, protect our privacy by allowing us to take our data that resides on one platform and remove it, take it over to another platform. Those are legitimate issues for Congress to consider. The one thing I don't think we want Congress doing, though, is being in a position of giving the government authority to determine what speech is going to be allowed to go over the airwaves or to go over these social networks. That would create some huge First Amendment issues, but accountability is a legitimate goal and a legitimate thing for Congress to be considering.
But Bill, Germany is a democratic nation. They have very strong laws against, for example, the use of Nazi speech in that country, Nazi symbolism. And I'm not suggesting that that everything that happens on Facebook is analogous to that, but if there are certain things that lead, as in the case of January 6th, to an insurrection, shouldn't that be regulated?
Well, it's a challenge under our First Amendment about how much federal or state regulation of speech is allowed. Certainly, under the First Amendment, you cannot yell fire in a crowded theater. And the government is legitimate in attacking that kind of behavior. So there are some analogies that work here. But the point is, through transparency, through accountability, there's this debate about whether we should change the immunity from lawsuits under Section 230 of the Communications Act, whether we ought to change that to hold the platforms to a higher standard of behavior. And that would be another way of forcing them to discipline themselves, but without government deciding what speech is allowed and what speech is not.
Fascinating
Bill,
discussion.
how much of, when it comes to antitrust laws and enforcement, how much of a factor are we, the consumers of these products? It's basically part of the business model for these platforms is they gobble up the competition. They see somebody else is working on, I don't know, a video conferencing company. They wait till it gets some traction, then they give them, $1 billion and they gobble it up. And the end result for us as the consumer is life's a lot easier. I sign into Facebook and suddenly I have access to all these other services as well. It's part of the problem that we as consumers, we just kind of go along with it because our lives are made easier in many ways.
I call that the Pac-Man problem, right? You gobble up everything in front of you to prevent some small startup from potentially becoming a threat down the road. That's an area where I think antitrust enforcement and the courts have fallen short. That is, there ought to be some limits on what a dominant firm can do in terms of gobbling up its competitors. So you make a very fair point. I agree with it.
It's an interesting discussion, specifically one around monopoly. I mean, you know, I kind of wonder, I question, you know, the monopolies that were broken up, you know, back in the 19th and early 20th century, whether it was, you know, steel or oil or telephones, if the rationale for breaking those monopolies had more to do with business, in other words, creating more competition, and less to do with the fact that, for example, you know, you were ruining the environment, or you had children working in your mines or on your railroads. I mean, you know, those are the questions, to your point, Emery, about how we are affected by these big companies that have these far-flung impacts on our lives. It's a really interesting discussion, Bill. We'd love to have you back to continue that.
Look forward to it.
Thank you very much.